June 1942. The Pacific Ocean lay quiet, wide, blue, and deceptively calm. Only 6 months earlier, Pearl Harbor had burned, and the United States had tasted defeat for the first time in generations. Across the ocean, the Empire of Japan marched from victory to victory. Hong Kong, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies. To the Japanese High Command, the Pacific now belonged to them. But America was not beaten. In shipyards from California to Hawaii, new carriers took shape. Pilots trained day and night, and, in small windowless rooms, codebreakers listened, calculated, and waited. Their work would soon uncover the plan that could decide the future of the war. The Japanese intended to strike a tiny speck of land called Midway Atoll, just 300 miles northwest of Honolulu. To them, it was the perfect trap. Draw the remaining American carriers into open water and finish what they had begun at Pearl Harbor. But Admiral Chester Nimitz and his commanders knew something Japan did not. Their plan was no longer secret. In darkened war rooms at Pearl Harbor, the men of Station Hypo had cracked Japan's naval code. Message by message, they pieced together the invasion timetable. By early June, the U.S. Navy was already moving. 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, steamed toward Midway to set their own ambush. On deck, sailors loaded bombs and fuel. Pilots studied maps, knowing many would not come back. "If we fail here," one officer wrote in his diary, "the next battle will be fought on our own shores." The sun rose over the Pacific, warm, golden, and silent. The calm before Midway had begun. In the early months of 1942, while Japanese forces expanded across the Pacific, another silent battle was being fought, one of intelligence, patience, and mathematics. Inside a small, dimly lit building at Pearl Harbor, a group of U.S. Navy cryptanalysts, known as Station Hypo, worked day and night, surrounded by radio static and stacks of intercepted messages. They were led by a quiet, brilliant man, Commander Joseph Rochefort. To many, he looked like an ordinary officer, soft-spoken, always wearing his bathrobe and slippers as he worked. But his mind was razor-sharp. Rochefort and his team were trying to break JN-25, the Japanese Navy's top-secret code, a complex system of numbers and additives that changed daily. Every message they cracked revealed only fragments, coordinates, code names, hints of something big. Then, in late May, they noticed something strange, repeated references to a location labeled only as AF. No one knew what AF meant, but the Japanese were clearly preparing a major operation there. Commander Rochefort had a theory. AF was Midway Atoll. To confirm it, he came up with a clever trap. He asked the base at Midway to send an unencrypted radio message, reporting that its freshwater plant had broken down. 2 days later, a Japanese message was intercepted, reporting that AF is short on water. Rochefort smiled. The deception had worked. AF was indeed Midway, and Japan's next target was now confirmed. With this information, Admiral Chester Nimitz had the advantage he needed. He immediately ordered the carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and the still-damaged Yorktown to sail. For the first time in the war, the United States knew where and when Japan would strike, and they would be ready. In the silence of the Pacific, 2 mighty fleets were now on a collision course. One side believed they were setting a trap. The other knew exactly where it was. The code had been broken, and history was about to change. June 1942. At Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester Nimitz issued the most daring order of the Pacific War. 3 American carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, would move north of Midway Atoll to lie in wait. They were outnumbered, but not outsmarted. Across the ocean, engines roared to life. Sailors loaded bombs, planes rolled onto decks, and the vast American fleet began to move. Every man aboard knew that the next few days could decide the fate of the Pacific. The Yorktown had been badly damaged at the Coral Sea, yet shipyard crews in Pearl Harbor performed a miracle. In just 3 days, she was patched, refueled, and back at sea, her decks still scarred, her crew determined. Far to the west, Japanese carriers under Admiral Nagumo steamed toward Midway, confident of surprise. They believed the U.S. fleet was still reeling from Pearl Harbor. They were wrong. American PBY patrol planes scanned the horizon, searching for the enemy's shadow. Nimitz's carriers took up silent positions northeast of Midway. Radio silence was absolute. No signal could reveal their presence. On deck, pilots waited in tense quiet, reading letters, cleaning goggles, whispering prayers. Flight crews checked torpedoes and dive bombers again and again. The ocean was calm, the air heavy, as if the world itself held its breath. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Japan's most powerful fleet was closing in. On June 3rd, a lone scout plane spotted dark shapes against the sea, the invasion convoy. The message crackled back to Midway. Enemy sighted. Every man aboard the American carriers knew what came next. As darkness fell, Midway prepared for attack. Anti-aircraft crews stood ready, spotlights pointed skyward. On the carriers, red deck lights glowed faintly as pilots slept beside their planes. The trap was set. All that remained was for the enemy to walk into it. Before sunrise, engines would roar again, and the Battle of Midway would begin. Dawn, June 4th, 1942. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the Pacific as Midway's radar picked up approaching blips. Aircraft, fast and numerous. The Japanese strike force was coming. Alarms blared across the atoll. Pilots scrambled to their planes, mechanics fueled engines, and anti-aircraft crews took their positions. Midway was awake and ready. From the north, dark shapes appeared, Japanese bombers and fighters descending like a swarm. Midway's gunners opened fire, filling the sky with smoke and flame. The air battle had begun. As Midway's defenders fought, a coded message was sent to Admiral Nimitz's task force. Air attack on Midway. Enemy carriers sighted. On the American decks, pilots ran to their planes. Engines thundered to life. One after another, American squadrons roared into the sky. Torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighters, all searching for the enemy fleet. The ocean below glistened like steel. Every direction looked the same. For hours, the pilots searched the endless horizon. Fuel gauges dropped lower and lower. Many saw nothing but clouds and sea. But they kept flying, because somewhere out there, Japan's carriers were waiting. Then, around 7:00 a.m., one American scout plane caught a glimpse of something. Faint lines of smoke far on the horizon. The pilot banked hard, sending his report. Enemy fleet sighted, bearing 3 on 20. The hunt was over. The attack was about to begin. Below, the Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu turned into the wind to recover planes from the first attack on Midway. Their decks were crowded, refueling and rearming aircraft for a second strike. None of them knew that death was already on its way. High above the clouds, American dive bombers formed up for their run. Below them lay the enemy fleet, unaware, exposed, and moments from history. Radios clicked. Target in sight! The trap was complete. In minutes, the balance of power in the Pacific would shift forever.
High above the clouds, the American dive bombers of Enterprise and Yorktown searched for hours, exhausted, low on fuel, and nearly lost. Below them stretched a calm, endless ocean. Then they saw it. 4 Japanese carriers, exposed under a bright June sun. By pure chance, Commander Wade McCluskey had turned in the right direction. It was a decision that would change history. His squadron formed up. Engines roared, canopies closed, and pilots whispered their last words to God. Below, the Japanese decks were chaos. Fuel lines stretched across the surface, planes rearming for another strike on Midway. They were caught in the worst possible moment. Unprepared, exposed, and unaware. McCluskey radioed the words. Attack! One by one, the dive bombers rolled over and plunged toward the enemy. The sky filled with streaks of sunlight and thin trails of smoke as they descended from 20,000 feet. Within moments, the Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were hit. Columns of smoke rose into the sky, a sight visible for miles across the Pacific. The tide of war had turned. Many American pilots never made it back. They had given everything, courage, skill, and their lives, to change the course of history. On the decks of the carriers that survived, sailors watched the rising smoke and knew they had done the impossible. Hours later, aircraft from Yorktown found and struck the final Japanese carrier, Hiryu. With her loss, the Imperial Navy's strength in the Pacific was shattered. The hunters had become the hunted. As the sun sank behind the horizon, the ocean was silent once more. The greatest naval ambush in history was complete. America had seized its first great victory of the Pacific War, one that would echo for generations. The Battle of Midway was far from over. But in those few hours, destiny had changed its course. Next, chaos in the sky. The sky above Midway still burned with smoke when the Japanese prepared their response. The carrier Hiryu, the last undamaged ship in Admiral Nagumo's fleet, launched her planes in desperate retaliation. Their target, the American carrier Yorktown. From high above, Japanese scouts scoured the horizon. Hours passed before one finally spotted a lone carrier cutting through the waves. The message went out, enemy carrier sighted. Aboard Yorktown, sailors worked quietly to recover returning planes. The wind was calm, the ocean still, and for a brief moment, it seemed as if victory was secure. But on the horizon, a dark formation was coming fast. Lookouts shouted. Anti-aircraft guns roared to life as Japanese dive bombers broke through the clouds. The sky became chaos, black smoke, rushing wind, and blinding sunlight. The Yorktown shuddered under near misses, flames licking her flight deck. Damage control crews rushed through corridors, sealing bulkheads and fighting fires. Against impossible odds, they brought the ship back to life. Minutes later, a second wave appeared, torpedo planes this time, flying low and fast. The Yorktown turned sharply, dodging the first torpedo, but another struck her side. The carrier began to list slowly, the sea rising against her hull. Smoke poured from the ship as the order came. Abandon ship. Sailors jumped into the sea, clinging to rafts as their ship drifted away. Wounded, but not yet gone. Later that night, Japanese submarines moved silently through the dark waters. One torpedo found its mark, and the Yorktown slipped beneath the Pacific waves. A ship that had fought in 2 great battles was gone, but her legacy remained. The U.S. Navy had won the battle, but the price was heavy. Dozens of pilots, hundreds of sailors, and an entire carrier were lost. Yet for the first time since Pearl Harbor, hope filled the Pacific night. The Battle of Midway was nearly over. The Japanese fleet turned away. broken, burning, and retreating into the vast Pacific. Next, the tide turns.